The Israelis have more influence on American foreign policy than probably every other nation state combined, right? If you took the Brits, the Saudis, the Turks, the South Koreans, and the Japanese, and whoever, the Germans, our most important allies, and all their lobbying power is probably not equal to the power of the Israelis in the United States and their fifth column. Well, I hate to say that I think the war in Ukraine is going to drag on, and I really hope I'm wrong about that. And if I'm wrong, good, because I hate this war. I just can't stand it. The longer it goes on, the worse the consequences for everybody are going to be. But I think that and I think Trump is sincere. He wanted to end the war, but he can't end it because the Russians are winning, but they're winning slowly. They're taking this territory, but they still have a quarter of Donetsk to seize. And the Ukrainians are losing, but they're losing slowly. And they're not wanting to turn around and run, or not enough of them for the Russians to just walk in. And so the war just drags on.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is Scott Horton. Scott is the director of the Libertarian Institute, host of the Scott Horton Show, and author of several acclaimed books, among them Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, and Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be with you.
Obviously, there's a lot going on around the world, ranging from events going on over in Europe, the Middle East, et cetera. Of course, we've unfortunately have had Charlie Kirk, be assassinated. I figured we'd start off with your current outlook on things geopolitically, and where you see things at currently.
Well, I mean, overall, I would say the height of America's imperial power in the world was probably in 2003 when W. Bush made the massive unforced error of invading Iraq. He didn't really have to invade Afghanistan either, and that was its own monumental blunder, but nothing like going to Iraq. So I think overall it's been downhill since then. And the good news is we're never supposed to be an empire in the first place. It makes no sense whatsoever for the middle part of North America to try to dominate the rest of Eurasia and the old world over there. So all we have to do is quit that and save a lot of money and a lot of grief. Yes, it's true that if we left Europe, then Germany would probably be the dominant power in Europe. But so what? It ain't the Third Reich under the Nazi Party or anything like that. So if they are, they're still going to more or less get along with Poland and France. And if tensions start raising, by all means, let's host a peace conference. But America has to be the dominant military and political power in Europe forever from now on to prevent Germany from working out a deal with Russia or something. It's crazy. And it's no different than our posture in Asia, where, of course, after World War II, America's 100 million times more powerful than any nation state in Asia, including Japan, which we occupy. And then there's, the rest of our allies in South Korea and the other smaller nations there. Other than Vietnam, which is now our ally after we lost that war, trying to impose a regime on them. And then there's the Chinese who, frankly, just used to be so impoverished. They were dying by the tens of millions under, Maoist communism there, the world's greatest nightmare in history. And then, but ever since, Mao died and America tried to befriend the Chinese and bring them into our fold, we taught them. They sent Milton Friedman. He ain't Murray Rothbard, but it's better than Marx. And they sent Friedman over there to teach him about markets and property and prices and things. And so they now have the ability, of course they do, to field their own navy and keep America off of their shores. So we're supposed to not accept that and throw a temper tantrum and maybe have a war with them over whether they can take sovereignty over their own stupid island that Richard Nixon recognized was their island back 50 years ago. Said, hey, we'd prefer it if you don't retake this island by force. Well, if America recognizes Taiwan as part of China, why not just negotiate their reentry peacefully then? Why create this permanent standoff? They cry microchips, just move the factories to Texas then. They literally, I know everybody's seen this on, the internet or on YouTube or the Discovery Channel, but they have jumbo jets that you could fit a jumbo jet inside of so you could transport across the world so they can put together the rest of the parts on the thing. So yeah, go ahead and move that stuff if it's that crucial. But It makes no sense that America has to be the absolute guarantor of order in East Asia, in the Middle East, or in Europe, and we're completely broke. And so there's no point. I mean, the interest on the national debt is now the biggest piece of the budget, bigger than all of the Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the military itself, and the Pentagon Empire, and the intelligence budget, and the rest of the national security state. Just interest on the debt to try to maintain this ridiculous posture in the world. So even Charles Krauthammer called it the unipolar moment. Well, that was in 1990, 35 years ago. The moment is over. So it's time to retrench. No European power or Asian power is coming to the Americas, not in force, not to challenge American dominance here. So let's just go back to the Monroe Doctrine. So we promised to stay out of the old world if they promised to stay out of the new world. And which everybody always forgets that part of it, that we promised to stay home too. And then we can see that all of the sort of middle rank powers like China, Russia, India, Brazil, and them are trying to come together as their own economic bloc just to keep us out of resentment and fear of what we'll do. We put sanctions on everybody all the time, declare economic war on them, if not, CIA coup d'etat war or outright invasion for any country that steps out of line. So they're doing everything they can to ensure themselves against that by more and more engaging in their bilateral trade and using their own local currencies instead of US dollars and all of that. And so it's not like this would have happened anyway, right? If America had played it cool, it would have worked a lot better and lasted a lot longer, but they didn't. So it didn't. And so I think the good news is, of course, that Americans are perfectly safe over here. Unless our government gets us into a nuclear war with a major power, there's no power in the world that could ever even imagine threatening our nation with their Navy coming here, bringing their troops here to occupy our shores. Yeah, right. And so we have two weak and friendly neighbors, two vast oceans with a minimal Navy and minimal nuclear deterrent. We could keep this country safe and guarantee our independence into the indefinite future and save a hell of a lot of money in the process there. And it doesn't mean that the rest of the world will be great after that. But after all, it is the fact that the age of the old European empires is over and the contests over all that territory. The age of the totalitarian Nazis and commies is over. And so what do we got? Nothing worth pretending is a real threat, not really. The best they can settle on for a danger is Republican Russia with their red, white, and blue flag and their center-right Christian president. So that's my overall assessment is this has all been for naught. Let's call it off now before it's even more too late than it already is.
Beginning around '03 is kind of when things started to turn downhill for the U.S. and such, getting involved in regime change and such. How would you define the forces that are fomenting or trying to stir up further conflict and such? How would you define that power structure if you could to the audience?
Sure. Well, look, it's a vast conspiracy of interests, most of them right out in the open, right? You have this is Obi-Wan Kenobi explains to Anakin Skywalker in episode 2. He says, the politicians are only worried about the interests of those who finance their campaigns, right? And then who finances the campaigns of the legislators who have the power of the purse? Well, the people who receive that money from the purse. That's it. And so whether we were talking about agribusiness or banking or pharma or anything, the biggest firms, of course, have the biggest interest in lobbying the national government, especially to get what they want. And in the case of Lockheed and Boeing and SIAC and General Atomics and General Dynamics and all these other major firms, I hope I didn't leave out too many. These guys have a vast built-in interest in keeping the war machine going. And so they take a very small percentage of their actual tax revenue that they contribute, that they get. And they recycle that into financing the think tanks that write up the studies, into buying commercials on TV shows, to keep their loyalty. You ever watch Sunday morning TV, like, very uptight, high level news show TV in the morning for wealthy people and connected people to watch that nobody else pays attention to? And then they'll say at the break, brought to you by Northrop Grumman. and we're bringing security to you. And so in a way you could say, well, maybe they're advertising stock essentially, but not really. What they're really doing is they're grasping NBC by the throat and they're saying, what would you do without us? That's what we thought. And NBC gets that message loud and clear that, boy, we sure are dependent on Northrop Grumman, and we sure are dependent on Pfizer, and we sure are dependent on the vested interest for keeping our machine going, which is, of course, why no one pays attention to them anymore, except, people inside, what Orwell called the party up there, the actual power elite. Nobody else pays them any mind because we can see how dishonest it all is. But for those with the wool pulled over their eyes, they don't, and don't see the vested interest or the conflict of interest there. They're, led to believe these are the experts who know what to do, when you could, from just a certain point of view, again, as Obi-Wan Kenobi might say, you might look at NBC as simply a production of Northrop Grumman, that they are themselves, in a way, through their money, they're the production company that is putting on this, what seems to be a news channel, right? Bringing you what's going on, when the whole thing is vested interest really from inception. It used to be NBC was owned by General Electric directly. Now it changes hands and whatever, but same difference. And so that's a huge part of it. And I think your audience is probably familiar. Almost everyone should be. If they're not, if people are young and tuning in, it was Dwight David Eisenhower, who was the 5-star general who led all American and United Nations forces in Europe against the Nazis in the Second World War, and then was the 2-term Republican president of the United States, and a very center-right guy, by the way. He was, no Robert Taft. And his last day in office, 2 days later, he gave this speech about the military-industrial complex. He's the one who coined that term, and said in his speech, he explained exactly what it was. The arms manufacturers have a vested interest in keeping this thing going. And so it is incumbent upon everyone else in the society to do everything you can to keep them in check. Okay, good luck, everybody. Bye. And he left. But so, in some ways, people think of this like it's a conspiracy theory, because you're talking about a network of power that's hard to define. You don't know everybody's last names of all the executive vice presidents and the decisions they make and the lobbyists they hire and the decisions that it's all very kind of opaque. So maybe there are assumptions built in some places about how it works. So that makes it seem like a kooky topic to people or something like that. But then again, if you look at, especially in the last regime under Joe Biden, they rechristened the whole thing the defense industrial base, the military industrial complex, the defense industrial base. The first is kooky, crazy conspiracy theory. The second is the exact same thing, only now it's the most important part of American society, and it's the most important part, it's the most important reason they could think of left to vote Democrat. It's because they promised to keep taxing you and giving your money to the defense industrial base. Got to keep that defense industrial base going, even if it means we got to come up with a war to be involved in somehow so that we can keep that defense industrial base. You see, we're at the point in 2025 where it's all devolved completely to parody, right? This was like, if you read Politico, very close to the Democrats. This is Biden campaign officials say, this is why we have to do this. Now, this is what the U.S. Army guys, the GIs in Vietnam called the self-licking ice cream cone. We're here. They don't even see the irony in saying the reason we have to have the war is so that we can have the war industry, rather than even pretending it's the other way around. So that's just the hugest part of it. And then that goes for every military officer who doesn't just resign and go get a real job. And especially the very top brass who know exactly, who are so self-interested. It is impossible they don't perceive it. They have an empire of golf courses and resorts around this planet just for America's military officers, right? It'll go down in the history books, right? As, one little couple of paragraphs in the history of America's empire before the fall. Right? That, yeah, these guys love being wined and dined. But does that mean that they do anything to protect us? I don't know the ratios now. You probably do better than me about the number of enlisted people, the ratio of enlisted to officers, and for that matter, top ranked officers compared to the guys who actually get any jobs done, right? It's the whole thing is all just a grift, right? And then the same thing for every egghead at the Council on Foreign Relations and the Center for Security Policy and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and all of the other, pro-war think tanks and all of their expert guests and whatever. And then, of course, is the Israelis. I mean, you used to be able to say, well, it's the Brits, but not really. I mean, they participate in everything, but they're not really driving it, right? And when George Bush says, Tony Blair, come with me, he says, okay. But that wasn't the other way around. Now, in 91, that really was Thatcher saying to Bush Sr., come with me. Times change. But the Israelis have more influence on American foreign policy than probably every other nation state combined, right? If you took the Brits, the Saudis, the Turks, the South Koreans and the Japanese and whoever, the Germans, our most important allies, and all their lobbying power is probably not equal to the power of the Israelis in the United States and their fifth column. And they've done just an incredible, talk about world history. They've done a world historical job of suborning American Christian churches, whether they're avowedly fundamentalist, dispensationalist, premillennialist, Darbyite kind of, that extreme or not. It's just taken as a given somehow that the Christian religion says that the USA must be made to serve the interests of the state of Israel under the rule of the Likud regime. It reminds me of the W. Bush years. You might remember, if anyone knew better than George W. Bush and his regime running around, they thought they were running errands for Israel. Actually, they were only empowering Osama bin Laden and the Ayatollah Khamenei. But anyway, if you knew better, then they would say, oh, yeah, well, it says in the Bible, Romans 13, when the Republicans are in power, you have to worship them and obey them and do whatever they say. Yeah. Oh, that's what the Bible says, huh? And the Bible says you have to do whatever the Likud party says. And they have convinced people, which is the most cynical and ruthless and evil thing that I could possibly think of, right? It's like, can you imagine being so ruthless that you would essentially deceive people into substituting their deepest and most sincerest faith about their grandma in heaven and all this stuff with the need to support a foreign regime, and especially in their crimes against innocent civilians as they covet and steal and kill and take other people's property away? Is absolutely insane what they have done. And it's just an absolute crime against this society and everyone who's participated in it. Is just, it's unbelievable what they've done. And that's only part of it, right? And of course, there are vast differences of opinion in organized Jewish communities across this country, but by and large, they support this. And by and large, the Israel lobby is, even though it's a very small minority of Jews, I'm not saying they represent the opinions of all American Jews by a long shot, but the most organized Jewish groups essentially act as agents of a foreign power and exert an incredible amount of influence on our Congress. And, there's quite a list of congressmen who've been thrown out of power, for daring to cross them. I actually just interviewed about half an hour ago or an hour ago. I was talking with a guy, Wally Rashid, who did this YouTube series on how they got rid of James Traficant. Remember Congressman Traficant with the funny toupee? And he was the Democrat from Ohio, and he would always rant and rave. And at the end of his rant, on the House floor, he would say, "Beam me up, Scotty," which was like a reference to America being an alien planet and him needing to get the hell out of here. And really funny guy. And it turns out that he took on the Israel lobby and they destroyed him. And they used the national government to prosecute him twice. And he won the first time, represented himself. And then the second time they nailed him, they refused to even let him defend himself. And they rigged the whole thing against him. It's like a Stalinite show trial, and ran the guy right out of power, and maybe killed him. I don't know. The guy's internet broke out before we were able to finish the interview, but he died in a mysterious tractor accident, out in the field all by himself, which, I guess these things happen. But anyway, there's been a whole bunch of congressmen who have dared to speak out, as Paul Finley put it, and that's his book about it, who dared to speak out against Israel and their influence in the United States. And then they're routinely just denounced as anti-Semites and evil racist bigots and driven out of power. And in fact, as Wally Rashid was saying to me, that the thing is, this practice has just worn thin. There's too many people to falsely label a vicious anti-Semite for opposing Israeli policy for it to stick anymore. It used to be if somebody said that about somebody, you'd be like, dang, I wonder what he did or said. Now you're like, no, I don't know. Just because somebody's accusing that guy, I presume his innocence, right? As Pee Wee Herman said, don't wear it out kind of thing. They wore it out. And especially when you have, and back to American Jews in Israel, when you have American Jews leading and helping to lead anti-Zionist protest movements all across this country, right? Who, I got a letter, and this is not unique. I mean, this is, a common occurrence, but I got a letter from a guy named Yaakov something, whatever, like the most Jewish sounding name. The guy lives in Brooklyn, New York, from that community, born and raised, just absolutely railing against Israel and thanking me for covering their atrocities and their illegitimacy and their nefarious influence in the United States and all of that. There are plenty of Jews. Think about Max Blumenthal and some of the other leaders in the media, but also if you look at the universities, you have Jewish Voice for Peace and all these other, student Jewish groups leading these protests against Israel and all of that. So, it's a huge controversy. The Israeli state has made it one. And that's the real point. I guess the buried lead here is this is the most criminal regime in the world, Israel and America for abetting them. And they're worse than the Chi-Coms. People have to completely exaggerate what's going on in the Xinjiang province to the 100th power to try to pretend it's anything like the ruthlessness with which the Israelis treat the Palestinians on a good day, never mind in the middle of this war. But their occupation of the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza for far longer than the Soviets occupied Eastern Europe is just one of the worst things going on in the world. And there are other, tyrannical ethnic occupations and border disputes here and there and wherever in Eurasia, no doubt. But this is the level of cruelty, and I guess as the Me Tooists would say, the power disparity between the Israelis and their captives that they're killing. I mean, this is really fish in a barrel, right? This is not, Ben Shapiro and other Zionists always try to pretend that Palestine already is a sovereign nation. It's the country next door. And they attacked Israel across Israel's borders. That's not true. The Gaza Strip is just a concentration camp. It's just a prison. It's been under total Israeli control since 1967. They de facto, but not de jure, annexed it entirely since then. They've had total control of it since then. And they claim that Hamas is the government of the Gaza Strip, no more than the Aryan nations is the government of your local state prison. That's just not true, right? The prison is owned by the regime, and the regime is in Tel Aviv and in West Jerusalem. It's just a farce. And in fact, as many people know this, it should be like common knowledge now, but I'll tell you, you can read all about it. Just type in Richard Sale, UPI, Israel and Hamas, and you can read about how Israel helped to grow Hamas in the first place from the late 1980s to create a right-wing religious alternative to the secular commie PLO. And because they wanted to divide and conquer the Palestinians. They wanted to have Islamist terrorists so that they could say to you, but they're Islamist terrorists. It really is as simple and as cynical as that. People say, it's always these cliches, isn't it? Well, if the Palestinians would just lay down their arms, then we would have peace. But if the Israelis laid down their arms, the Palestinians would kill them all. Well, what's the evidence for that? The Palestinians are completely helpless. The Israelis destroy them all day, every day. They tried to resist in 2018. They did the peaceful March of Return to the gates, completely unarmed, Martin Luther King style protest. Tom Friedman in the New York Times said, do that. It'll work. They'll have to let you out of your penitentiary, where you did nothing wrong except be born not Jewish. And then they just sniped them all. They murdered them all. Remember the March of Return in 2018? They just murdered them from 300 yards away. Like they were all, Charlie Kirk out there. And it's just absolutely ruthless. And that's why Israel needs America so badly, is so that they can get away with bloody murder. If they wanted to be a normal country in a normal time, America would have to cut them loose and see how they balance their regional politics when they don't have Big Brother to back them up all the time. But for capitalists in your audience, do you remember the Greenspan put? That was when in the 1990s, Alan Greenspan bailed out was it the Knickerbocker Bank? It's like right on the edge of my tongue. It was something. I think that was what it was. He bailed out this bank in New York City, just this one bank. And everybody went, oh, Alan Greenspan will save us if we get in trouble. And it became this huge thing. And they already had low reserve ratios, and the banks all have licenses to print money anyways. But they all just went for it. And they knew this is what economists call a moral hazard. They knew that the central bank will bail them out if they make a bad loan and get stuck. And so that helped to precipitate the next major financial crisis, which hit in 99. And of course, the one after that in 2000. And that got the nickname, the Greenspan put, he'll bail you out. Same reason they bailed out Mexico. When they bailed out Mexico, they weren't bailing out Mexico. They were bailing out Chase Manhattan Bank. They were bailing out New York City, who had made bad bets on Mexico, right? And so it's the same thing here. When we promise that we will always have our allies back, then they make irrational choices that they otherwise would not make. We have another one from yesterday and 2 days ago. There are Russian drones. Apparently, it's not in dispute that they were Russian drones. They got shot down over Poland. The Russians say, I think plausibly, because it is, I don't know. I'm waiting for a more plausible explanation. The Russians say the Ukrainians jammed their drones and drove them off course. Now, we don't know if that would be deliberate or not, if they were deliberately trying to drive them into Polish airspace, maybe. But the Russians, they were unarmed drones. The Russians had no real reason to do that, right? But then what was the Polish government's reaction? We demand a meeting of NATO. We invoke Article 4 and immediate consultations with the major powers about what we're going to do about this escalated Russian aggression. When, of course, the rational thing to do would be to say, okay, this war has gotten out of hand. We need a ceasefire before this thing escalates any further. But they got America, the 800 trillion megaton gorilla, behind them. And so they go, yeah, you want to pick a fight with me? Well, you got to pick a fight with my big brother, America, too. How do you like that? I'm quoting the polls, very loosely paraphrasing them from yesterday, right? That was what they said. Bring it on, Russia. Right, America? And that's what we do for Israel, too. Now, you could see why, if you and I worked in the Israeli foreign ministry, why this would be our highest priority, would be keeping America under wraps, keeping America under control, keeping American politics pro-Zionist at all costs. Because what would we do without them, right? And so that's the way they look at it. The question is, why do we have to tolerate this? And look, I'll give you one just to finally end this rant. As everyone knows, the bin Ladenite enemy, they are the radical edge, the farthest radical right edge. Yeah, they're kind of Leninists in their revolutionary ways, but you call them not conservatives, but radical rightist, Islamist, terrorists, Sunnis, right? The Salafist and Wahhabist edge of Sunni Islam. But the Israelis' enemies are the Shiites. The Israelis' enemies are the Iranians. Their friends now in Iraq, because W. Bush listened to the Israelis and invaded in 2003 and put the Shiites in power in Baghdad after a 5-year civil war. That was what all those guys died over. And then it was Syria until America helped, Joe Biden helped al-Qaeda take over Syria last December. And then Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Now, Hamas are Sunnis, but they're still backed by these same Shiites, by the Iranians especially, but not to a great degree. But that's the Israelis' problem, is Hezbollah. So if there's a fight where Hezbollah's on one side and al-Qaeda's on the other, Israel not only wants to support al-Qaeda, they demand we support al-Qaeda. And then we do. And that's what happened in Syria beginning in 2011. Well, really kind of before that, even beginning under Liz Cheney and the W. Bush years in the State Department, building up the Muslim Brotherhood to be the government in exile, the Syrian National Council, to try to take over that country. And then when the Arab Spring broke out, they backed al-Qaeda in order to try to overthrow the secular Baathists, because they're friends with Iran, because they're Alawites close to the Shiites, friends with Iran, and help Iran help Hezbollah. And so Barack Obama put the entire American regime in the service of Al Qaeda in Iraq, beginning when, you might remember, America still had troops in Iraq in the name of fighting Al Qaeda in Iraq through the end of 2011. But from the beginning of it, America was on their side in Syria. And then after that even blew up into the caliphate in 2013 in Syria, and then rolled in and conquered Western Iraq in 2014. And Obama then launched the ISIS war, Iraq War III, against the Islamic State Caliphate in Iraq. They were still backing Al Qaeda in Syria through the end of Obama's presidency. Why? Pwned by Israel. That's why. Same reason W. Bush did Iraq, same reason Obama helped to create the caliphate. Now, at the end of that time, the Russians intervened, and then Trump called off support when he came in 2017, called off support for the Al Qaeda guys, and they all finally got rousted up and held up in the Idlib province in northwestern Syria, where they were essentially held in stasis. Trump didn't do anything about it for 4 years when he had the chance. They were held there. And then at the end of Joe Biden protected them too. They're mostly under the protection of the Turks, America's NATO allies, the Turks, there in northwestern Syria. And the very end of last year, the end of November, beginning of December, the Turks, the Israelis, and the Americans activated these Al Qaeda terrorists. These are literally Al Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria. And they sacked Damascus and took over the country. And their leader, they call him al-Shara now. His name used to be al-Jilani. And he fought Americans in Mosul and Ramadi. And he admitted that to PBS Frontline, American government TV, when they were rehabilitating him on Frontline and trying to, put lipstick on a pig here. This guy who's beheaded hundreds of people and led legions of suicide bombers in the most brutal Al-Qaeda-ite fashion that you would, conceive of, who bragged about, or at least admitted, that he fought Americans in Mosul and Ramadi in Iraq War II. He is now coming to New York to be greeted at the UN. America's giving him full recognition. Donald Trump, they're trying to arrange a meeting between him and President Trump in New York. Trump already met with him in Saudi Arabia a few months ago, and they are trying to completely normalize relations. They treated Bashar al-Assad like he was bin Laden. And then now they're treating bin Laden's, essentially like his stepson, a guy who literally is a bin Ladenite, literally fought with Zarqawi in Iraq War II. And they're treating him like he's just great. And why? Because that's what Israel wants. Because Israel hates the Shiites more. And that's the answer. It's the same reason Barack Obama committed this treason. It's the same reason Donald Trump is. Sorry, read him and weep.
Crazy stuff. I mean, between the shifting of alliances, the influence of the Israeli lobby in our country and such. Wanted to ask you, Scott. Some have said or speculated that Israel is kind of a proxy for the city of London and kind of powers up there. If I might ask, what are your thoughts on that as it relates to Israel's sovereignty and such? And
Well, I think I'm not up to the latest literature on this or what, but I think the power is not in London. I think the power is in New York and in Washington and in Tel Aviv. And London's basically along for the ride. And this is, the American Empire was the creation of the Anglo-American establishment. But that old Anglo-American establishment is gone. And I think the empire that they created, even the Rockefellers were new money. You know what I mean? It's not like they were a Mayflower family or whatever. So they were kind of the last gasp of that old Eastern liberal establishment. And the thing is they helped to solidify the creation of this world empire that now no one's in charge of. And it's really just an imperial court and a free for all. And so then you have, just this conspiracy of interest between the agencies and all their vendors and the foreign governments that use them. And where the American people are essentially, we're just here to pay the taxes. We're just here to suffer the inflation, for them to, and provide the soldiers for them to get away with this stuff. And it's just all at our expense. And it really is treason. And I mean that in a lower T case. The Constitution says that's aid and comfort to an enemy in wartime. I don't mean it like that, but is it essentially, imagine being a powerful player, some powerful faction. You're a lobbyist for Boeing in Washington, and you see how much influence the Saudis and the Brits and especially the Israelis have there. And then you think to yourself, man, I got to sell these guys some airplanes. Not, hey, you know, at my private country club this Sunday, I want to raise with my fellow Americans the question of like just how much influence are we letting these foreign countries have over our country and over the people of this country who don't have power and influence, who aren't part of this at all, but who live here, right? Like how much of this do they expect us to carry for them, you know? And they don't care about us. Like literally they don't. Clearly they don't have that conversation. They see how much power Israel and Saudi and them have, and they go, let's just sell them some airplanes. It's the American people's responsibility to figure this out if they don't like it. You know, there's I quote this in the book. I forget if this is in Enough Already or Provoked. I think it's in Provoked. Where pretty sure it might be in the previous book. Forgive me, but it's a quote from a guy from Raytheon, like an official statement from Raytheon, saying, "We don't make policy, right? The government comes to us, and we help to provide them with the equipment they need for their security needs, right? And that's our job, right? Helping the government protect the United States of America. You know, red, white, and blue, Pledge of Allegiance." But then you look and you see that Raytheon pushes hard for policies that generate and perpetuate conflict. And the worst example is, yes, it's the New York Times, but they got it right out of the horse's mouth here, right? It's just as plain as day. It's an interview with Pete Navarro, Trump's trade guy from the, I forget his exact title, forgive me, but from his first term. And in Trump's first term, Barack Obama started this war, by the way, in 2015. He switched sides in the war in Yemen and took Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia and UAE's side against the Shiite Houthis who had taken over. Again, in this case, because that's what Saudi Arabia wanted. And they waged a massive, essentially proxy war through Saudi and UAE and Al-Qaeda forces on the ground against the Houthis for years, starting at the last 2 years of Obama and then through all 4 years of Trump. And now let me tell you, there is no Houthi lobby or Yemen lobby anywhere in America. The only people who were opposed to this, who did anything about it, were hippies and Quakers and libertarians and a few good conservatives too, like at the American Conservative magazine pushed really hard on this. But it was just grassroots support only because out of what's right. There was no interest at stake for the opponents here. And I played a very small part in it, but we successfully pushed to get the War Powers Resolution passed through the Congress twice, like in a no S word, little d democracy, bottom up expression of power, like in the best way you could think of to try to stop a war, right? And a treasonous one benefiting Al-Qaeda at the expense of their deadly enemies is crazy. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, who had attacked us multiple times by then already. And attempted to. And then there was only one thing that stopped us. According to Pete Navarro, what got Trump to veto the War Powers resolutions was lobbying by Raytheon, the missile manufacturers. They said to the Republicans with a straight face and I guess a chalice of blood that, hey, we're making money off of those bombs and we like money. Keep the war going. And then the Trump White House agreed and said, okay. And then their reasoning, get this, their reasoning was the tariffs against China had disrupted manufacturing and had angered even American manufacturers because these are complicated supply chains going back and forth. And so American manufacturing was upset about the tariffs on China. And he said, you know how we'll make it up to American manufacturing? We'll put Raytheon on welfare. We'll increase tax benefits to this one merchant of high explosive delivery vehicles. As though that somehow benefits American manufacturing in general. Like, I don't know, I make ovens. Well, what the hell does that have to do with helping Raytheon? Nothing. That's the oven manufacturer's money that's going to Raytheon. right? It's nonsense economics, but it's the economics of politics. And so Raytheon leans hard on Pete Navarro. Pete Navarro tells Trump, well, sir, I think you better veto this one. And he does. And, you know, people might abuse the term genocide, but in the case of America's war against Yemen, from, again, Obama started it 2015, but through the first year of Biden, that was a genocide because the Saudis and the UAE, their air forces were absolutely bombing civilian targets all along on purpose, bombing neighborhoods, bombing farms, bombing markets, bombing any industry, any marketplaces, any, you know, auto dealerships or whatever. But then, you know, bombing the fishermen's boats, bombing the horses in their stables, you know, bombing all the irrigation systems and everything. And they did inflict a famine. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And, you know, when in direct deaths, there's probably 100,000 actually exploded to death, which is incredibly high, probably higher than American direct combat casualties inflicted on Iraqis in Iraq War II, even. But then on top of that, the excess death rate from just completely decimating their food supply and their ability to harvest it and deliver it to market and the rest. And people died by the hundreds of thousands, at least 300,000 excess deaths in that war. And so what do you call it when nations, in particular the world's most powerful nation in currently and ever, when we're deliberately inflicting a famine on another nation? It's the same thing that we're doing, helping the Israelis do to the Palestinians right now, deliberately starving them, right? This isn't just bad weather came and we did everything we could. No, this is man-made. We're the men, the U.S. government, and in a very vague sense, the American society that continues to tolerate this stuff. It's completely crazy, and it's never been in our interest. You know, I'm going to try to make a note to always say this in every interview from now on. Colonel Douglas McGregor says, time wins more arguments than reason. All right. Time goes by. People can just see. We should not be doing any of this. We've been bombing Iraq for 34 years. Does that sound right to you? Really, we bombed them this year. We bombed them last year. The only year we didn't bomb them was like in 2013, maybe. If we went 12 months in a row, it would have been in 13. But I think there could have been even a few drone strikes. So we had to chase those terrorists across the line into Syria where they're heroes. But otherwise, at least here and there, we've been bombing Iraq this whole time. We still got troops there, still going out on missions. Sometimes fight Shiites, sometimes fight Sunnis. This whole time. I think anybody could say that, oh yeah, no, it didn't have to be this way at all. Never did.
Well, you're reminding me of Tragedy of Hope, you know, and the nature of that work and how so much that has gone on. And as I've become more awakened, Scott, since you know doing this show and I'm over 100 episodes in and such, it's completely changed the way I look at things. I mean, profoundly, and you can't put a price on that. That's for sure. I know we only have a few more minutes before you have to pivot, but I wanted to see what where do you see the puck going at this time, whether that's in the Middle East or Europe, any other speculations that you have as where we are presently today?
Mm. Well, I hate to say that I think the war in Ukraine is going to drag on, and I really hope I'm wrong about that. I'm not. My job is really not making predictions. You know, I can tell you about things that happened before and analyze them for you. When it comes to predictions, I mean, you asked the question. I'm not. That's not normally my job, but and if I'm wrong, good, because I hate this war. I just can't stand it, and it's just the the longer it goes on, the worse the consequences for everybody are going to be. But I think that just. And I think Trump is sincere. He wanted to end the war, but he can't end it because the Russians are winning, but they're winning slowly. They're taking this territory, but they still have a quarter of Donetsk to seize. And the Ukrainians are losing, but they're losing slowly. And they're not wanting to turn around and run, or not enough of them for the Russians to just walk in. And so the war just drags on. And this is totally just slippery slope argument. I admit it. There are all kinds of things that could change. But just it seems to me by the logic of government programs, now that the Russians have taken anyone who likes them out of Ukraine, either literally or just by drawing the line around them. Obviously, a lot of refugees have fled into Russia. But now that they've done that, they've left a rump Ukrainian state that is almost guaranteed to be ruled by absolutely fanatical anti-Russian fascists from the far west of the country. And when I say fascist, I don't mean that I'm an American liberal Democrat who calls everybody to the right of me a fascist. I'm actually not. I'm a libertarian, and I only call people fascists if they are avowed fascists. That is a real word with a real definition, and these guys are it. And I just actually wrote my most recent article for antiwar.com. It's about a guy named Andriy Beletsky, who is a avowed Hitlerian who, although he tries to disavow it now, but a little too late, buddy. And he's the currently Colonel Andriy Beletsky, the leader of the 3rd Army Corps fighting up in Kharkiv. And if he survives this war, I think there's a very good chance he could be the next El Presidente or even dictator, Führer of the country. And he, at least in the past, has stated the kinds of things that are, absolutely fanatical Nazi ideology. And his group is directly descended from the units that served the German army in the Second World War, and including helped to perpetrate the Holocaust, not only against Jews, but also even especially against Poles in what's now far western Ukraine, which was then far eastern Poland. And so there's a real history there. I mean, I think we all learned, at least in my generation, we all learned very vaguely that there were people in the east over there, east of Germany somewhere, where in the mind's eye, it was a lot further away back then, believe me. But somewhere over there were people who actually welcomed the Germans because they helped push the commies out. And people had been so tyrannized by the Soviet communists that they actually welcomed the Nazis. But then they found out that, these Nazis ain't very pleasant neither. And then the Nazis lost the war and the commies won and just enslaved everyone who was left alive by that point anyway. And what a disaster it all was for everyone. Well, that played out in Ukraine. That's one of the places where that happened, where there were people in the far west of the country, especially, who did welcome the Germans in to help them overthrow and to throw off the rule of the communists, which of course was very short-lived. And then, as people may be familiar with the urban legends about this, but it's all in the book Provoked. I talk all about how, and you can even read declassified CIA long-form histories about this, their support for these Nazi groups in their resistance against the Soviet Union after the Second World War. Once America occupied West Germany, then we took the side of the Nazis as long as we were using them against the commies, especially, in Eastern Europe. And that lasted through like the mid 50s, like early to mid 50s, 53, 54. Although the CIA continued to back them in the United States and in Canada, and, their little kind of groups in exile here until they could go back after the end of the Cold War in the late 80s. So that's where these guys come from. And I think that they're going to continue to be perceived to various degrees, and probably quite credibly, if I had to guess, by Moscow as a threat. And then I think they're just going to have to continue on. In other words, the Russians have painted themselves into a corner by taking everyone who likes them out of Ukraine, by redrawing the border the way that they have. So that means at least they have to paint the corner as big as they can, make as much space for themselves as they can by probably probably retaking everything east of the river, and potentially even taking everything all the way to Poland and just driving everyone before them out. Because especially if they have a guy like Beletsky in there, they could have a ceasefire now and a peace deal. But if they have an outright Nazi Reich, running Kiev in a year and a half or less or something, with all the torchlight parades at night and all other crazy, Nazi ideology, and if they're persecuting Russian-speaking people in what's left of rump Ukraine, then the war's just going to start right back up again. And so I told you, I'm just speculating here. You asked, and so I'm speculating. But I don't see, I'll tell you one bright spot in that. The one bright spot is the Russians have said that they're willing to only annex southern Zaporozhye and Kherson, and essentially draw the lines where they are now. These are two of the four, I guess, major states or provinces in the country that they have claimed. And they're saying, you know what, instead of insisting on the old historical boundaries, maybe we could draw the line where it is now, which means they would still control the entire Azov coast, and they would have, you know, what they call that land bridge from the Donbass to the Crimean Peninsula, and they would still have access to the southern Dnieper River and its channel of fresh water to the Crimean Peninsula, which has no fresh water sources of its own, and or not enough to sustain their agriculture anyway. So, so the fact that the Kremlin was willing to climb down that far is a hopeful sign. The catch was that, but the Ukrainians have to turn around and walk away from the 1/4 of Donetsk that they still control. And they're not going to do that, right? Not until they have to, right? Until they're dead or just completely broken force. So, but that's as optimistic as, or that's the only hopeful note I can even, you know, try to highlight. You know, everything else there just looks terrible. And I think Donald Trump, and don't anyone get me wrong, man, I hate the Democrats more than y'all do. I always have. I've been like this since Waco, really before, but especially since Waco, which was just in the first year of Bill Clinton, the first 6 weeks of Bill Clinton, the first 10 weeks of Bill Clinton. So I am not sitting here trying to attack Trump from the left. Please don't anyone like hear me in that light, because it's not what I mean. But he has just, let me put it this way. Trump has been Joe Biden on Israel policy. I mean, the fact that they tried to spin Biden as weak on supporting Israel, that we need a tough guy like Trump instead. I mean, that is just amazing. When Joe Biden has always been Israel's lowest lackey in Washington, D.C., and Trump has done everything that they wanted. Remember, I mean, he probably asked them for the favor to like stop the war right around his inauguration, because he wanted to have peace right around then and claim credit for brokering the peace right before the inauguration and all that, which was fine. But then what, 3-4 weeks later, the Israelis broke the ceasefire. No one even pretended they didn't. They did not go to the second stage of negotiations. They just started bombing again. And they broke the deal that they made with Trump, and he didn't even care at all. He just endorsed it. He just says over and over, they need to hit harder. They need to finish it. They need to hurry up and win. Good. And here's some more bombs. And that Joe Biden, he was weak. He didn't give Netanyahu enough bombs, which is not true. And then Trump just thinks that this is smart politics. You might have heard him say, because he said it multiple times. I think he said it once and someone agreed with him, or somebody said it to him and he thought it was smart or something. So he's repeated a few times that, you know, it's a real tragedy that Israel used to control our Congress 100% lock, stock, and barrel. And now they don't. It's the worst thing ever to happen to America, that Israel lost its total control over our legislature. It's because of that vicious, racist AOC or whatever. Huh? And he said that. I mean, so I think almost no matter what he does, I'll probably always hate Trump's enemies more than him. You know what I mean? I can't bring myself to despise him the way I despise Bill Clinton or W. Bush or Obama in that way, exactly, because he is an outsider, and I do kind of still hold out hopes for him in a way. But the truth is that he just doesn't give a damn. The Israelis, they're his friends. Miriam Adelson and her former husband, Sheldon, before he died, gave him hundreds of millions of dollars, pat him on the head, told him he was good and that they liked him a lot. And then that's all that he cares about. You know, when he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which is hugely important, it means that America recognizes Israel's claim that all of Jerusalem is, as they put it there, undivided, eternal capital of Israel, meaning the Palestinians cannot have East Jerusalem, even though they live there, it's theirs. And even though it was supposed to be the capital of a Palestinian state someday. So Trump moving the American embassy there was another way of saying there is no way in hell you're ever getting a Palestinian state on the West Bank in any way. And at the ceremony, he turns right to Sheldon Adelson and goes, "There you go, Sheldon. I did it for you. I hope you're happy." He might have left out, "Thanks for the money." And then that was it. So, and he has no reason to think otherwise about it. You hear him talking this insane talk about we'll just get rid of all the Palestinians and we'll make Gaza into a resort. And they even had a meeting just the other day. I just read this, and I forget if it was the Wall Street Journal or what, that they just had a meeting with Jared Kushner the other day to talk about the plans for the Gaza Strip. We're going to build condos. It's going to be like Miami Beach in Gaza. Once we're done killing and expelling all the Palestinians, 2 million people. They said maybe we'll move them to Ethiopia or to Sudan or to Indonesia. What? This is crazy. And Donald Trump has apparently just given them a blank check. You guys can do whatever you want. You want to drag us into a war with Iran? Fine. You want to bomb our ally, Qatar, where Central Command is located at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, right? This is our ally. Israel just bombs them, whatever. Pretend to scold them in the news. Oh, yes, we were very disappointed about that. And honestly, and they've already said, Mike Huckabee, the ambassador, has said, they've signaled, we don't care if the Israelis annex the West Bank. Well, what about the 3 million Palestinians who live there? Then they will just have no citizenship whatsoever, which is Israel annexed the West Bank in 1967, quite frankly. But now they're going to officially annex it. And then they'll officially be an apartheid state until and unless they complete the ethnic cleansing of all the Palestinians on the West Bank too. And just carpet bomb Jenin and Ramallah and Bethlehem and all the cities on the West Bank and force all the Palestinians out of there too. And finish their Greater Israel project. And at this point, I don't see any reason to believe that Trump would stop them. I think he is just completely in the tank for them by whatever means. I had a funny joke that's not that funny about how maybe this was why the CIA and the FBI framed him for Russiagate. Was because they knew he was actually an Israeli spy, but they couldn't say that because that's anti-Semitic. So they framed him for being a Russian spy instead to try to weaken him, but that blew up in their face because they're such damn liars that it just meant that we wanted to see all them at the end of a rope instead of him. But the guy is, I mean, man, you got to admit it. He's more of an Israeli agent than Bill Clinton, at least as equal to W. Bush or Barack Obama, which is... And, not that Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu ever got along, but he did what he was told for 8 years. So, including even creating a caliphate to spite the Shiites. You can't really get better than that. So, I don't know, man. The poor Palestinians. I mean, imagine, again, because this is an Indian reservation. This is not the nation next door. This is part of Israel. It's just a ghetto where they've herded all of the non-Jewish people that they hate into this concentration camp, right? And they just keep them in there. And then they kill them on a rate of, on average, something like a Waco massacre per day. Every day, right? It's from like 70 to 120,000, 70 to 120 people every day. Sometimes it's as low as like 50. So that's why I try to average. I think it's probably on average more than a Waco, because Waco was, they say, for 76 to like 83 or whatever. Depends if you count the pregnant women who gave stillbirth in Bill Clinton's flames there. But the Israelis do this to the Palestinians every single day. Imagine Bill Clinton doing a Waco massacre every single day to like the Indians on their reservations out in Arizona, or to the blacks in Chicago. Well, we're so sick of the black criminals in South Chicago. You know what we're going to do? We're going to build a giant wall around South Chicago, and then we'll just kill like 60,000 of them by exploding them to death and collapsing their apartment buildings on top of them, burying them alive in the rubble. Huh? It's almost unbelievable. I just think if anyone is in doubt of the reality of the situation, just go type in Gaza on X and just go see with your own eyes. You see every single day. Look at the headlines on antiwar.com. We cover this stuff day in and day out at antiwar.com. And it's a Waco massacre every day. I think I kind of babbled earlier how I'm still not over Waco from 1993. Right? That's like still half of why I'm here. We're doing that to them every single day. And it is the USA. I don't mean we, you and I aren't the regime, but this is the American-Israeli war. Israel can't not do this without us. 100%. According to their own, top defense ministry officials. If America cut us off, we'd be grounded. That's it. They're flying our jets, dropping our bombs, and hiding behind our shield in all the international institutions. They'd be completely ruined without us doing this for them. And then the worst consequences for them and the worst consequences for us, we'll just drive further down this path, right? Next time somebody does some crazy kamikaze attack in America, they'll say, see, the Muslims hate our freedom. Okay, Israel, tell us who you want us to kill next, and then we'll go attack them. It's a real bad path that we're on. The good news is that it doesn't have to be this way at all. And that more and more people just don't believe in this stuff because it's just crazy nonsense anyway. Again, time wins more arguments than reason, and nobody could stand by any of the arguments that they made for any of these interventions anywhere in the last 25 years. Maybe some people still stick by Iraq War I, but not after 10 minutes in a room with me, they won't. You know what I mean? So I just think we don't have the power, but we are winning the argument. We are winning in the overall narrative. It's just too obvious that empire, and especially our relationship with Israel, are just too self-destructive to this country and our best interest, as could be defined by any family at their kitchen table. What's good for this country in the short, medium, long term? It's not this. It couldn't possibly be this.
I am, I'm just floored by the nature of things, and especially the more that becomes more known in alternative media spaces. I don't know if you had a couple more minutes or if you needed to make a pivot, Scott. Okay. No worries. How can the audience learn more about you and get in touch with you, Scott?
Sure. Well, I'm the host of the Scott Horton Show, and that's at scotthortonshow.com. And then I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org, editorial director at antiwar.com. And soon I'll be opening the Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom. You can check that out at scotthortonacademy.com. And then check out my books, Fool's Errand about Afghanistan, Enough Already about all the terror wars, and Provoked about the Cold War with Russia and the war in Ukraine.
Scott, thanks so much for your time. I hope to have you on in the near future, and God bless you.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Quick ask. Over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.